Welcome back to my shed, and thank you very much for watching our summer replays of some of our earliest episodes on Gary's in the Shed. And today I thought we'd take you back to a very early episode, in fact, episode number 2. And it was an episode all about the simple wooden box.
I'd always thought that boxes would play a big part in the design of the shed. Way before I retired in 2021, I made a polystyrene model to visualise how this was all going to work together. And on site, as soon as the builders had put a roof on, I was trying out different layouts for the main bench, where the whole idea was to have heavier boxes on wheels at ground level and then lighter material on the shelf above. Of course, along with space for some power tools. So the boxes were always top of mind. As you'll see, I love making them. I guess that's because I could prove to myself that even I could make something good to look at and something that's also very useful. You see, that's creativity with purpose. The homemade wooden box for me represents the perfect harmony between form and function. They are strong and stable, they're from materials out of nature, and they're always built with love and care. So, of course, they're an obsession. And by the way, it wasn't just me wanting more boxes around here. So when Angelica understood I was making all these boxes, she suggested, I know, why don't you make boxes so we turn it into like a little library for some of our books? Good idea, I said. And then off I went, started making these boxes. And when I calculated what it was going to take to fill the whole room, it turned out to be 42 boxes. There was a complication in trying to figure out the proportions of these boxes. So we had to start with what was this height, big enough to hold a standard small book, then double. And it was not until then could we calculate how tall is this box, and therefore how long is this box. We got it right in the end after a bit of trial and error, and now every one of those boxes is interchangeable. Clever, eh? So you see, it all makes sense, right? So let's get started. So first we've got to make a long cut in quite a long piece of wood. For that, we're going to need the table saw. So we'll bring that out here. Excuse me, just so you know, that is Mia. You'll be meeting Mia and her 2 brothers, along with all the other animals, in an episode coming soon. Sorry, back to you, Gary. We'll set that up and get ready to do some cutting. That'll make some dust. So at this point, what I should do is explain to you what we're doing about the dust. And of course, a decent exhaust and a decent filtration system is pretty important in any kind of workshop. And especially here because, as you know, at the other end of the building, I've got wet oil paint, so we don't want a lot of dust in the air. So this arm can swing around to just about every point in the workshop. And I can now plug this into the back of the saw. So the vacuum sucks the dust up into that pipe, back down to this system here. First, it goes into what's called a cyclone, and that's a way of extracting the larger pieces of wood. And then the remainder goes into this filter system here, and that's the base vacuum for the whole system. Meanwhile, up here, we've got a standalone, sophisticated HEPA filter system, which takes very small particles of dust out of the air. And then finally, I've got this machine which sucks air out of the room at head height, which is important. And this thing will remove about 7 cubic meters of air every minute. So the combination of all of those systems, I think, gives us a pretty good attack on the dust problem. This is a different kind of saw. It's called a mitre saw. It's ideal for doing these kind of cross cuts. Pretty good cuts. As I said before, you don't actually need a whole lot of expensive power tools to build a box. Just hand tools will do the job. And I thought I'd just demonstrate how I would go about that. So this is the front or the back of the box. I've measured it carefully and I've got a pencil line there that I've drawn. But what I'd like to do if I'm using a handsaw is to actually cut the top fibers of the wood just with a knife so that I get a nice clean cut at the top. And you'll see what I mean a little later once we get through it. So that's just slicing the top fibers of the wood. And now I like using these Japanese pull saws. They're called a pull saw because you don't push, you actually pull. They're very, very sharp and very, very good. But be careful. Once you start cutting, sometimes they flex and pop out of the cut. And I can tell you by personal experience that it cuts deep. So what we do normally is I use my thumb to guide the saw and start carefully cutting along that line that we showed you before. And that is starting to get a nice clean cut. So we're close to the final third step of the process, being first you measure, then you cut, then you assemble. So we're at assembly stage. What we've got now is the base, the sides, the fronts and the backs. So the question is, what's the best way to assemble all of these things together? Well, let me show you how I do it. I mean, everybody has their own ideas about this. I've already attached one side, and now I'm just applying the glue on the second side. By the way, these, I don't know if I've mentioned these before. I use these every day. They're called 3-2-1 blocks. That's because this is precisely 3 inches by 2 inches by 1 inch. They're quite heavy and they're very useful for just holding objects steady. I use them all the time. Every workshop needs them. 3-2-1 blocks. Okay, let's do this. So what we need to do is stand this up, get a little bit of support behind us here, put that, and we're ready to go. Now, this is an air-powered tool by DeWalt. I've got nails in there. If you don't have a compressor, save up for one. You don't need a really big one. For a couple of €100, you can get a small compressor, which is probably more than enough for a small workshop. But anyway, these things just save so much time. Watch out for your fingers, though. Getting one of these into your fingers is not a good idea. So carefully turn that over. Put a bit more support in there. It's ready for the fronts and the backs. As I mentioned before, I thought it would be a good idea to show you if I was building this just with hand tools, how would we do that? Well, you saw me earlier cutting this piece of wood. Now, how would we apply it with nails? I would use glue. But a little trick that somebody taught me years ago is I need to find that line here, right in the middle of that piece of wood, to make sure that my nails are penetrating into solid wood. So I know what that depth is. So I can now run a line on the wood, on the bottom and the sides. So I now know where the nails need to go. So if you can see that line, that's where the nails will need to go. So let's take a closer look. I'm going to give the nails a little head start here so that they are penetrating through this first piece of wood easily. I'm using what are called bullet head nails. The purpose of these is they have leaving a very, modest hole size in the piece of wood. So they're easier to cover later. So I'll put these in. They're just about ready to go. Trying to keep them as straight as you can, of course. So we'll just apply some glue to this connection here. I'll turn that around so I get the bottom right first, as always. Let's go. There we are. Now, if you want to make that really pretty, what I would do is I would get a very simple punch and bury those nails even further into the wood, like that, leaving a nice deep hole. And I'll show you how to fill that hole in just a second. I always keep a good supply of dust from the table saw for exactly this purpose. So I put a bit of wood in a little pot. I add some glue, stir it up into a bit of a paste kind of consistency. And this only takes just a minute or two. You just need to go back to the hole where you buried that nail, place plenty of this paste across the top of the hole, and then when it's dry, you will find that with a little bit of sanding, that will completely disappear. So there it is. Thanks for your patience. I know it takes a little while, but I'm only an amateur. That box is now complete. What I would do next is just do the finish sanding, and then I would just oil it just for protect the wood for greater duration, and probably put some wheels on the bottom as well. Anyway, that's a box, but what about all these other boxes? Now, I've been making boxes now for 3 or 4 years, and I've made many. And I'd like to show you some of the specializations that I've gotten into with boxes, because some of these things have quite peculiar functions. Let's take a look. Boxes aren't just for storage, sometimes they have special functions. So I thought I'd choose a few examples for you today. So this box here, this is for my leather working kit, trimmed in leather, of course. Just like this one, no particular purpose. I just like the contrast between the white, the leather, and the wood. Some of these boxes are really very interesting ideas. So this one is a good example. I got tired of the smaller paintbrushes disappearing down tall boxes like this guy over here. So I built this with 2 different layers of wire mesh so the paintbrushes do not fall over and disappear. So that's cool. This is an important one for me, because the wire mesh allows me to see right across the other side of the room when I'm getting low on coffee capsules. Important. This box is just for storing paint. This is for my Sharpies. This is for small paintbrushes. This is for tiny little objects, like these are called grommets. And then finally, I did make a jewellery box for my wife, Angelica. It's not terribly beautiful, but I have to tell you, that's about as fancy as anything gets in this workshop. Quite happy with that. These mitre joints, they could not get more simple, but they can become very complicated not going there. I'm happy with it. So in summary, the other thing we did this morning when we were preparing today's video was we actually went around and counted how many boxes I'd made. I'm almost embarrassed to say this. The number came back 154. Now, if you think that's crazy, you are in 100% agreement with my wife, Angelica. So thank you very much. See you again soon.